Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I have this mic. Is it working okay?
Yes.
Great. So I am delighted to be here. So thank you so much, ACCJ, for inviting us. This is a topic that I'm personally and professionally passionate about. The reason why we started the study in 2011, and this is the third year for us to doing this board study, is to really look at what's going on with Asian boards. So if you look at the diversity as a topic, if you look in the US and Europe, there are many, many studies that's been done and is continuing to be done to monitor the progress on this front. But if you look across Asia-Pac, there's very little study that was done to really compare and contrast and monitor progress. So this was kind of our commitment to this topic and why we thought this topic was worthy of. This year in particular, we added the component on performance for the first time in our study, and that has some great results that I'd like to share with you. But frankly, this is about creating this dialogue and putting at the forefront why this diversity is an issue, and that it's an important issue that we all have to work on. So I'm hoping that this will just start a good dialogue for all of us, and I'm sure all of you have had great experience and wisdom as well they would like to share. But before I got into the topic, I just wanted to share a story about my board meeting last week. So I had a client who called me in because they needed a new board member. One of the board members stepped down. And it's a Singaporean listed company, and they only have 6 board members, so it's a relatively small board. It's a listed company, but that's owned by the family. So it's a third generation cousins that are running the company. This is a very typical of many Asian companies, right? So one of the family members is the chairman, another one is the CEO, another one is head of strategy. And because a listed company must have at least 50% external board when the CEO and the chairman is owned by the family member, they have 3 external boards, but all of them are Singaporeans. All of them are men, surprise, surprise. And let's see, and 2 of them are, one used to be an accountant for that company, and when he retired, they asked him to be on board. The other one was a lawyer, and when she retired from her law firm, they asked her to be on board. And the third one was a family friend, right? So it's a very, very close circle. They get along really well. But this is a challenge. This is a company that's been growing really, really well for the last 20, 30 years. It's been growing double digit. They're in a healthcare business. They're a household name in Greater China and Southeast Asia. But their margins are going down because the cost is going up. The world is becoming a little bit more complex, and they have saturated the markets that they're in. So they need to find a way to expand and grow their business. So what they did was they bought a company in Australia, a relatively small organic consumer products company. So they make organic shampoo, etc. So they wanted to diversify their product portfolio. They also wanted to geographically diversify their business. So they entered Australian market for the first time. But guess what? They are struggling with their Australia business. So they bought it, now it's their own, but they're losing money on that business because they don't know anything about the Australian market. And guess what's going on in China, which is their biggest market? China, the cost of doing business is going up at an exponential level, as you might guess. The talent is very expensive, and also the real estate is just incredibly expensive. So they have retail outlets with their hair care products and clinics, and frankly, the cost is going up faster than their revenues, right? So they had to consolidate and shut down some of their retail outlets, and guess what they are thinking about doing? Is using e-commerce channels. Because in China, e-commerce is taking off like a rocket ship. So if you can't afford to have big stores everywhere because it's just cost prohibitive, e-commerce is a very important channel and can be very, very effective if you use it right in China. So they're thinking about it. But I got to tell you, most of the board members are over 70. I think there might be one that's slightly under 70. Okay, so their knowledge of the internet world is, shall we say, a little bit outdated. So in any case, so these are some of the business challenges. And I thought for a minute, it's great that I'm going to Japan next week to talk about this topic, because this is a typical of what's going on in Asian boards. They are too homogeneous. There's no diversity in age, there's no diversity in background, there's no diversity in nationality, there's no diversity in professional background, other than bare minimum requirement of having an accountant and a lawyer. And there's no women, right? Another thing that, as we were having this board discussion, that dawned on me, that I highlighted to the group, was the fact that most of their consumers are women. So most of their customers are women. They sell to women because it's a healthcare product, and they make the decision power, but there's no women on that board. So anyway, so needless to say, we went through some potential board profiles, and they were amazed. We looked at people with a very strong Australia background. We looked at people with strong China e-commerce background. We had several women on the slate to talk about. And honestly, I think people's lights, their eyes started sparking up. And I said, wow, if we can get some of these people on our boards, it would be so helpful in navigating our business. But this is the very first time that this company has worked with an external search firm like us to have a very open discussion about who should join the board, and therefore went through the due diligence of really understanding what the business needs going forward, right? So I think their current board was fine for the business today, but they're not fine for the business tomorrow and where they want to go, right? So now the outcome of that meeting last week is that they would like to appoint a minimum of 2 new board members, possibly 3, right? Because they realize not one person could have all those criteria that they're looking for, so they might add more. And so this is the thing. Boards, are they important? They are important, right? Because they have to help mitigate risk. They also have to help companies navigate through a very, very complex business environment. And the world is getting bigger or smaller, depending on how you look at it. And there's no way that a very homogeneous group of people of any sort could have as good of ideas as having a diverse group. So this is why this topic is so important, and it's more important now than ever before, right? So, and I think it's very topical for Japan as well. So what I'd like to do is very quickly, I hate going through slides, frankly, but there's some results that I'd like to share with you. So let me get through them, but I would like to open up and have some Q&As and talk more lively about that. But if you have any questions at any point, please feel free. Okay, so I guess I touched upon most of this, so I'm just gonna skip this part. We'll talk a little bit more about how diversity have correlated with performance. And this was, as I mentioned earlier, was the first time we included this part to this research, and it caught the media attention. So when we launched this report, which everyone can get a copy of it at the end of it, we got CNN and NBC. And so I got to be on TV and live to talk about this. But what caught their headline was that having diverse board and having more women on board will result to better performance. As Elizabeth mentioned, this included 10 countries across Asia-Pac. We looked at essentially top 100 companies by market cap, because we needed a consistent method of, I guess, monitoring progress over time. And we also needed to look at, our focus was really looking at the largest companies and how they're progressing. So there are a number of other diversity criteria we looked at. We looked at age of the board members. We looked at the gender, obviously, but also nationalities and professional backgrounds. So there were some interesting findings that came out of it, but nothing as glaringly obvious as women missing on boards. Okay, so there's some good news that came out of it. This is the third year, as I mentioned, that we're doing this study. And we're going towards the right direction in that the number of all male boards, so this is when you walk in the boardroom, it's exactly the one that I described. 100% are men, right? So the number of all male boards are going down in most countries, I think with the exception of my home country, Korea. So overall, in APAC, it's 44.5%. We'll look at Japan numbers, it's a bit higher than that. I'm not sure if you'd be surprised at that. But, so roughly about 40%. Just a couple of years ago, it used to be about 60-some% that were all male boards. So 1,000 boards, over half of them had 100% men, right? And think about the reverse. If you walked into any large corporation and you only saw 100% women, don't you think that's a little shocking? I mean, I think all male is just as shocking. We're just kind of used to this idea, right? If you walked into Exxon's boardroom or whatever, and they were all women, I think that would be a little shocking. Yeah, so Japan, Korea, Singapore, Malaysia still have over 50%, and we'll go into that in detail. But overall, most companies, with a couple exceptions, have improved over the previous year. So this is what I mean. Japan, for instance, used to be 2%, moved up to 3%. So last year, Japan was last. But you guys moved up an inch with 1%, because Korea didn't move much at all. Right? So I think there was one woman that was appointed in Japan last year. So slowly you're inching up, but you still have quite a few places to go. Australia leads at 18.6%. About, when we first did it, they were at 11%, right? So huge progress, and I'll tell you a little bit about why that progress took place. Malaysia is moving up. India is the one to watch, because they used to be lower. I think they used to be around 4% a couple of years back. But India just passed the quota. So all listed companies in India have to have one woman on board, and they were given a year to do it. So a lot of family members, wives and sisters and cousins were appointed too, but at the same time, with that mandate, there are some really great women that are being appointed to some boards in India. So already this is slightly outdated. My guess is that India is going to be above 10% now, right? So they're going to charge you on ahead. If you look at leadership positions, it's even more pathetic. So only 3% of females are chairs of the 1,000 boards across Asia-Pac. 3%, right? And only slightly over 3% are CEOs of these large listed companies. This includes countries like Australia, where they do have made more progress. And no female chairs in India and South Korea, and in Japan, there's no chair and no CEO among the top 100 companies in Japan. Right? When we segmented the information by sector, healthcare came up as the highest, and it makes sense, right? There's a lot of women in healthcare sector, and also a lot of buying decisions are made by women. And the lowest was industrial sector. I thought it would be financial services, but somehow they were better. Okay. So this is the headline that we were very, very excited when it came out. So there are a lot of studies that were done by McKinsey, Catalyst, and a number of studies that have shown the positive correlation from companies that have diverse or gender diverse boards compared to those who don't, in terms of ROE and ROA, return on equity and return on asset. We looked at both, and the correlation were positive for both. 9 out of 10 companies came out that if you had at least 10% women on board, the overall ROE and ROA were better than the companies that didn't, right? The only exception was Malaysia, so we looked into Malaysia and why that happened, and it really had to do with Malaysian Airlines. They had an incredibly terrible few years, and their return on equity were extremely low, like negative 40%. No, negative 70%. And so that pulled down the average. They happen to have 2 women on board, so Malaysia is the only exception because of that one company. But all countries have shown significant improvement, especially Japan. There's a big difference between companies that have women on board versus not. So it's not just nice to do, but business imperative as well. So this is a little more detail in Japan. So all male boards are 68% in Japan. Again, this went down from the previous year. There's at least 28% or 28 companies of the top 100 that had one female, and only 4% with 2 female boards. And from 2011 to 2013, you guys moved up an inch, right? Not an inch, a percentage point. Right, but still a very, very long way to go. I just want to compare these numbers. Take a look at these numbers, because I'm going to flip it over to Australia, who was ahead of the pack in the group, what that looks like. So look at all male boards, 1 female, 1 and 2 female boards, those numbers. Australia, it completely flipped. There are only 9% all male boards. And 41% 1 female, 41% 2 females, and 9% 3 or more. Right? So you can see the demographics changing quite a bit. And if you look at the historical information from 2011 to 2013, it went from 11.2 to 18.6 in a very, very short time. And I'll tell you what changed and what moved the needle. In 2011, Australia passed the disclosure requirement for the listed companies, right? Mm-hmm. So what each company had to do was to disclose their diverse policy and target, and they're supposed to disclose at every level of the organization, including the board level, what the gender split is. And where there are gaps, they need to explain what they're doing about it and why they haven't filled the gap from their target. So it's disclosing the target, having a goal, and then every year at the annual report, they need to disclose their progress against that. And that changed the needle. So it's not a quota, but they call this a if not, why not policy. If you don't comply, you have to explain, and that made a difference. So for many, many years, because actually Australian women are quite vocal, so there were a number of NGOs and associations that are pushing this agenda. And every year they would come up with the answer. All these chairmen of large Australian companies would say, hey, look, we look for women, but we just can't find any qualified women. And that's been their biggest excuse over the years on why they can't appoint more women. So as soon as the disclosure requirement went up, all of a sudden they're finding women everywhere. So and that has really changed the dynamics. And I wish you could listen to some of those companies and the chairmen that are talking about how having few women has changed their discussion in the boardrooms and had a positive impact. The next one is India. Again, India, because of the quota that was passed in 2012, they're moving up. And my guess is it's going to be past 10% already, because every company, when they have a board position that's coming up for renewal, they're trying to appoint at least one woman onto board. And again, when you look at India as a country, it's very, very male chauvinistic and quite male dominant. But so I think they felt that they had to have a quota because not enough was getting done. Okay, so I think we talked about all this. There is just an incredible amount of opportunity. But more than anything, what I guess I would like to end with is to, what can we do about it? I think people and companies have to be aware that this is not just a nice thing to do, but it's a real opportunity to make an impact to their business. And it's been proven time and time and again by many studies, including this one. And the companies that have taken the bold move to make a difference on this gender diversity front is starting to show in their results. So I think everyone has to send that message out, and that would be the mission that I'm going to ask of all of you, to say it really does have an impact to the business. And setting targets and transparent nomination process, bit like the example that I shared with you at the beginning, I think that makes a big difference. When you have an open, transparent process with an independent search firm like us, it changes the dialogue. It goes beyond just asking your closest friend and your lawyer and your legal counsel to find the next available board member. The board function has to be a challenging one. It has to be the voice of questioning to assess the risk of the company and the strategy of the company and the direction of the company. And if you don't have a strong challenging function at the boardroom, you're going to end up with another financial crisis. And there's that, and because of the financial crisis, actually this whole topic of gender diversity has risen to a global imperative. And that's why Laura Davis in the UK and a number of organizations in the US and Europe, many European countries have passed the quota. So countries like Norway have 40%, and a number of other European countries followed suit. But it became really evident when there was a financial meltdown. So the question I was asked during that time was, if Lehman Brothers were Lehman sisters, would we have had the same problem? But this is the thing, if you look at the board of Lehman Brothers and all the bankers, they are cut from the same cloth. Nobody challenged the implication that their bad judgment would have had on the rest of the world. So this is why this is so important, so imperative, and why I'm so passionate about it. But as a next step to do, we need to grow the pipeline, especially in countries like Japan. Australia didn't have as much of an excuse about not having enough qualified women, but in Japan, it is a serious problem. So if, let's say, you were to introduce quota anytime soon, you will be struggled, right? Because it's a big responsibility. And if you haven't had a very robust corporate career that got you into C-suite, you would struggle to add value in boardrooms, right? And just having a woman as a token is not going to help you get to the result that you're looking for. We do need women who are qualified, who are experienced, who goes abroad, who've had many different business challenges, and have people who have grown and evolved from it, right? So all of us, all of you, can do something about making that happen. So that's it for my formal presentation. Happy to take any questions, comments, thoughts, and sharing.
We need you to use the microphone.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I just have a question about the research in terms of just parsing out the cause-effect of relationships, because my guess is that a lot of successful companies are progressive and therefore maybe hiring female leaders and board members, and so is that the cause-effect relationship you're seeing? Or based on 3 years of data, can you actually track whether adding female board members, it leads to successful results the other way?
Yeah, so you know what? This question was actually posed by CNBC as well. So I do want to make a distinction. It's correlation, not causation. Because there are so many factors that goes into shareholder return, right? So no one factor can be named as a causation. So my guess is your assumption is probably right. The companies that actually are progressive enough to have women at the very top of the house, meaning the boardrooms, my guess is that they have better corporate governance, they have a better practices, they're drawing from 100% of the talent pool instead of 50, and they probably have other programs in place that will promote or that would be more conducive to women moving up into the organization. So my guess is that it's a reflection of the health of the company rather than it is said to be the single cause of this positive result.
Hi, my name is Carlo. Getting a woman on the board is a great thing, and maybe 2 or 3 or who knows, 4 and 5. The main issue that we see here in Japan, I think, even when foreign males get on the board, is that they are given a post and then no role to go with it in an effective way. So they're there to look pretty and then expected to shut up. And I was wondering, just getting the person on the board may not be enough. There needs to be a strategy in order to get that person the ability to actually do something once they're there. What kind of preparation do you suggest a company can do to not only get that person there, but maximize the potential of that person once they are there?
Yeah, so there are a few thoughts. McKinsey did a study called Women Matter, and one of the things that they found out is in order to make an impact, you need minimum of 3 women on the board. Otherwise, you get marginalized, right? You get kind of shoved on the corner, right? So in order for that gender diversity to have a real impact in the room, the general rule is about 30%, right? This is the reason why many, many countries are now adopting 30% as a target. And I don't know if you've heard of 30% Club. Have you heard of it? So it started in the UK, but now they have chapters that are opening in lots of different parts of the world. In Hong Kong was the first one to adopt it, and then I think Malaysia was the next. So 30% Club is essentially an advocacy that's pushing government, pushing investors, pushing companies to have at least 30% of the board members be women. So 30% is the magic thing. Another thing is you do have to be prepared. Like if you're going to be an effective board member, whether you're a man or a female, you need to have a voice, you need to be able to speak your mind, and you need to be brave about saying your views, especially if it's against, let's say, the owner, the CEO, or the chairman. And so those are the qualities that in a most, I would say the more mature markets, those are the qualities that will get you asked to be on board, right? So oftentimes board positions are kind of, you get asked, you get found to be a board member because of your accomplishments and because of the qualities that you bring to the table, which is a critical eye, ability to voice their opinions and all of that. But if it becomes a tokenism, you can get marginalized, and especially if you are having a difficult time finding your voice. But if it's a one woman on board, it's proven even in developed markets that it's very, very, very difficult to make an impact.
I have just a question to ask. We're talking about gender diversity on boards. Did your study look at things, as you mentioned earlier, they were looking for an Australian to be on an all Singaporean board. Did you look at anything, any other aspects of diversity on boards?
Yeah, so we looked at the nationalities and it was bad. Most Australian companies had Australia, Japanese companies, Japanese, Korean companies, Korean. But ultimately it was at the end very difficult for us to analyze with definitive answer because nationalities are not disclosed of the board members. So we could only assume by the names that they had, whether they're Japanese or Koreans and this and that. But it was very homogeneous. So homogeneous thing is happening in every country. But if you look at some of the US companies and European companies, they're also homogeneous, but increasingly a company like ours are getting requests from big multinational companies from the US and Europe. They're looking for Asians with a special expertise in Asia because Asia as a region is becoming a very, very important growth market. So they realize that that's what's lacking in their boardrooms. And so there has been tremendous amount of requests for diverse board members like that.
Thank you very much. Your last slide mentions on improving the talent pipeline. And I'm just curious, what kinds of things have you seen, success stories have you seen in other countries that might be potentially imported here to Japan?
Yeah, so I'm based in Singapore, but I have a regional role, so I travel around quite a bit. And most of our clients to date are still multinational companies with large operations in Asia-Pac, although increasingly we do have more Asian companies now interested in this topic. I'll tell you one really, really good thing. Most multinational companies are desperate to get diversity, whether it's nationality or gender, right? It's on everyone's KPI, but not only that, there is a business imperative. So I went in for a pitch and spoke to a regional CEO. The company will go unnamed, but they make white goods, so washing machines, cooking ware, and all that stuff, stoves and all that stuff. And he said he was looking for a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. And he said, you know what? This is a European company. And the regional CEO was European, Brit. And he said, you know what, the other day when we're having a regional leadership team meeting, we're talking about the conversions of Asian cooking methods. Anyway, I don't even know what that means exactly, but he said that there are some men who piped up, but he said he looked around the room, there were all white male Europeans doing regional roles. So these are all expats sitting in Singapore, and there were 100% men. So he said, I need these qualifications, but I desperately need women on this, because what do these white men know about the conversions of Asian cooking methodology? You know, nothing, it was the answer, right? So he said he couldn't even take the guy who made the comment seriously, because he really, honestly, was talking out of So in any case, so there are so many companies now, whether you're in private banking, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're a consumer, where a lot of companies are desperate for it. So these are some of the things we're doing. So we are doing a lot of leadership development work specifically targeted for women. And a lot of companies are doing it at the middle management because that's where they lose people. So Japan is a little bit worse in that you don't even find that many women at the middle management level, if you look at the data. But countries like Singapore, they actually get to the middle management level, no problem. It's almost 50-50. It's about 45-55 kind of ratio. But it drops off when it goes to director level, absolutely drops off when it gets to VP. So it goes from like 45% to 20% to 10%, and at the CEO level, only 6% or 5%, right? So there's a drop-off point. And unlike Japan, Singapore is also different in that women work throughout their lifetime. So they don't tend to quit. Like in Japan and Korea, they often tend to quit when they have babies and all of that stuff. But because they have domestic help at home and they have multi-generational homes, they don't feel the need to drop out of work. And also, they don't have to drink all night long like they do in Japan and Korea. And so actually, it's much more conducive for women to work and continue their career in places like Singapore. But even then, their numbers are pathetic when you get to the C-suite, right? And so a lot of companies are now putting in very specific targeted leadership development programs for women, right? In a very male-dominated organizations with the practices are more conducive to attracting men than women. So there's a cultural aspect of it, of educating the organization about what they need to attract more women to continue on with them. And then also women themselves, I think, you know, I don't know if you've heard of Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. It's a very famous book now. You know, even a self-made billionaire like Sheryl Sandberg, who has a background that she does, I mean, this whole book talks about her insecurities, you know, and how, you know, unself-confident she is in moments. And I think that book resonated so well all around the world because I think a lot of women do suffer from it. So I'll give you an example. When I interview, and I interview mostly men because I deal with very senior level positions, most men, when they see, most women, when they see a job description and here's the requirement, if there are 10 requirements, they'll go through line by line and say, you know what, I tick 8 out of the 10, but these 2, I don't have it. So they'll make sure that I know what they don't have, right? And so they're a little bit unsure. It's like they want to be 110% sure that they're qualified for the job before they will raise their hand. Whereas men, on the other hand, even if they're only half qualified, they'll just say, oh, I can do this job and the next job. You know, honestly, there is such a stark difference. There's a real story. There's a senior executive who was going for a regional CEO role. He didn't qualify because the businesses he had ran in the past were much smaller than the one that I was recruiting for. So I gave him that feedback, and he also lacked a little bit of the regional experience because he was European, new to the region. So I gave him that feedback to sign him off. And guess what? He turned around and he said, hey, I noticed that the same company is recruiting for the CEO search in the US, and you guys are working on it. I go, yes. He goes, would I qualify for that one? Like, okay, so you didn't qualify for the regional CEO, but you think you might be qualified for the global CEO? I'm like, okay. But honestly, like, that's kind of sometimes, I mean, there are men here. I sometimes admire their confidence, although I question their self-awareness at times. So,
I feel like I'm in a hostile environment.
I try not to do too much male bashing because I like having men in these discussions. But there is, honestly, of course I'm generalizing, of course there are exceptions. But there are some differences in our style, in our confidence, in terms of the way we manage our career, our appetite to take risks. And so our programs, we did an open program in Singapore for 3 days. A lot of people signed up from many different companies. They're all kind of middle management level, about 12 to 15 year point. And it was so well taken. And it talked about self-awareness, branding, networking, how do you find sponsors? How do you build your self-confidence? You know, what's your elevator pitch about yourself? You know, what are some of the career risks you're going to be taking? And it was really, really well taken. And a lot of companies are now working with us on that front. So that's an answer. It is a very long-winded question, so answer.
Thank
so
you.
I apologize, but.
There was a question right behind Josh, actually.
I think you've just answered my question because it was around the talent pipeline and your point around the lack of women having a robust set of experiences to make them qualified. And my observation, just working in this market, is that it works both ways, that there's a hesitation from the women candidate side to actually sort of step up and take the chances or take those positions. And I don't think it's just modesty, but it's really the life. It boils down to lifestyle decisions around that, and with the lack of support system. So I was just curious for your view around how we can, in that environment, how we can sort of further the numbers and do something about that.
Yeah, I think Tom is going to speak a little bit more to it, so I'll hand it over to him soon because I'm thinking my time is over. But just on that front, I do think women do have to deal with childbearing. They have a bigger responsibility when it comes to family stuff. And there are societal expectations that women do more for the family and sacrifice more on their career. And those are really important responsibilities, so you can't really blame some of the women for not wanting to do it, which is a reason why it's very, very important for organizations to make their work environment a little bit more flexible and conducive to women who want to continue on. So I think there are many things that organization companies will have to do, but I also encourage a lot of women to take more risks. There are 2 areas that where women are lacking. So we have a huge set of leadership competencies that we can measure with millions and millions of data. We analyzed men and women and see what their differences are. Actually, majority of the 16 competencies that we looked at, women came out higher than men. Sorry to say, but the few areas that where men came out stronger is the financial acumen, it's the strategic skills, and it was around confidence in terms of your self-confidence. So, but you know what? Those are critical to moving up to the C-suite. You know, you can't be a C-suite executive if you don't know how to read balance sheet and be financial illiterate. So it's partly because a lot of women in a professional environment come up the functional routes like marketing or sales or whatever. Well, not necessarily marketing and sales, but in PR is a big one for women. HR is another big one for women. And so oftentimes they don't get the line management jobs, they don't get the P&L jobs, and they don't grow their career traveling internationally. So those are all the things that add to under-preparing women for C-suite jobs. So it has to happen. You know, you have to take some risks. And recently I was very happy about a hospitality client who took a risk with 2 women to head up Southeast Asia and Australia because he was so desperate to get more women, but they weren't coming. And so he took somebody from marketing and gave a P&L role for the first time in 2 of their biggest markets. And it was a huge risk he took. There was a huge backlash from the organization, but I do want to applaud the CEO for taking that risk because he thought that those 2 had a potential to move up to his role, but they didn't have the right P&L experience and took some risks for that. So organizations have to take risks, but individuals also have to step up. So I'm going to just, with that, turn it over to Tom. Thank you.
So here we go. So what I'm going to talk about are these 3 things. What's the current reality? And I think that you've heard most of that from Alicia. We know what the current reality is in the boardroom. But what's the current reality in play around the world about women? What are the headwinds that get in the way of women taking on higher levels of leadership in the organization? We know what the benefits are, and the benefits are not proven only by this survey, but you mentioned the Catalyst survey, you've mentioned the McKinsey studies. I mean, universally, they all say that when more women on board or on boards, there's better performance. There's better return on shareholder value. There's better return on equity. So as we look at that, it's been well proven. Now, we can argue the correlations, we can talk about why that happens, but I think that's the first time I heard that at least 30% and 30% in the boardroom is very important, so that people don't get isolated, to your point, and that we're not making appointments to just fill a quota or to be, you know, representative, that we have somebody on the board. I just came from a company that half the management committee were women, a Singaporean-based company. And the women were the head of the 2 biggest business units, head of corporate banking, the head of private banking, and the CFO. And I share with you the decisions that were made and the alpha male attitudes that were asserted in the room when decisions were made were quite different than in a management committee and on a board where they're all men. And I like your example of the Lehman Brothers. If it was Lehman Sisters, would we have had the financial crisis? So I think, you know, we don't need to belabor that and go into all the data, but what we can see, and this is kind of based on our data, Alicia talked about it, we've done 2.5 million assessments at Korn Ferry, and Korn Ferry and the companies we purchased over the last decade. And what the assessments have clearly told us is that, you know, not only are women underrepresented above middle management, but they're not getting the key line roles. And those key line roles are critical to getting the experiences that women need for general management. And there are some reasons for that. Okay, when we look at this across the world, I think Australia, of course, if you include Australia and New Zealand in the Asia sample, looks the best, but if we look across all of the world, then you'll see that Asia is, you know, really underrepresented by women. I think we've talked about that. And there's many reasons for that. You've talked to some of the sociological issues. We've talked to some thinking about perhaps in Asia that governments don't really want to assign quotas and take this on. It's more of a personal issue. We've talked about some specific challenges in Japan where daycare, childcare, elder care is not available as it is in other parts of Asia. And there's a lot of cultural issues, of course, that impact this. And I think that everybody's aware of those things in this room. That's where the workshop part comes. But I'm really curious, there's a room that's mostly women here, how do 4 men end up at one table? I've just been really curious about that. Since we sat down, yes. Okay. Okay, I mean, just one of those things that I've just been wondering about. Ginger. I couldn't say. Now that goes back to what Alicia was saying about self-awareness, right? Okay. So, going back to catalyst studies and going back to the McKinsey studies, I think this was actually seminal work that was done just in 2012 about some of the executives' perspectives of what's holding women back in organizations. And you can see they run from a range, no barriers. That's all those all-male boards that say, oh, we don't have a problem. It's all, just fictitious. If a woman is capable and she's had the right experience, she can get on the board. So you can see that's the low mark. But the high mark, I think, double burden syndrome. Women having to take more of the responsibility for things that happen at the home, child rearing, and hold a career, leaving a career, and then coming back to work, especially in the context of Japan, very difficult to do. And, we see this M-shaped curve in Japan, but really how it interrupts a career. But here's my first question to you. What are the factors in your organization? So I really wanted you to just a very quick conversation at your table, about 3 or 4 minutes in your organization. You don't have to tell me the organization you're in, but you probably already know it. Or you may be a sole proprietorship, so you may not have these, and you're a woman, so you don't have any of these issues. But just on your table, very quickly, let's talk about what are the factors in your organization in Japan that are getting in the way? Yep. Okay. Okay. That's a 24/7, walking around with the BlackBerry and phone all the time, and you're on conference calls 4 times a week, past 10 or 11 p.m. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Does anybody have one of those jobs? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So here's the first question I'd like you to discuss on your table. And let's do it very quickly. In 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to ask for some ideas about, in your organization, what's getting in the way of more women getting into senior leadership roles. So what I'm going to do is, Yoshiko, would you please go to this table and ask somebody to share an observation?
Do you want me to share one observation? We talked about 2 things. The one is the top management. For example, our company, I'm working in J&J, but I'm sitting in the board. But out of 15, only 3 women. But for men board members, most of them have housewives. So which means that they can't understand what's the role of women in society in their family life. They don't discuss in that topic. So that's a kind of unconscious bias. And the bottom level is the woman's kind of attitude or leadership style in Japan. Because of the education, we don't self-claim that we are very good as a woman or something like that. So it's a very difficult challenge from both sides, from bottom and top, we discussed.
Okay. Thank you very much. How about this table?
We had similar topics that we discussed as well. The lack of self-promotion was one topic that came up, and then also, Ginger, you had talked about from your lacks of flexibility as well, and yeah, that was pretty much. I was very much work-life balance. Also was another topic. And political lack of, or needing to build on political savviness as well.
Being able to self-promote and
Okay.
to self-promote.
Okay. So self-promote, we see it in the data from McKinsey, this inability to understand in having an unconscious bias about that in boards. I'm curious what, I was going to say the all men group was there, but Carolyn is here, kind of doing the 30% thing with this group. So what did this group? Any insights beyond that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, we discussed that similarities about middle managers and lower levels were almost 50-50, men, women, that sort of thing. But as they went up the ladder, it got less and less. And one of the main reasons was that a lot of females tended to see what their boss did, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to do the same job, and so they don't step up to take that further. They're happy doing what they're doing, if it's a middle management role. And then just a lack of qualified candidates too in Japan. And that's probably because they don't take that next step as well either. So I think they're the main things that we touched on.
Okay. Thank you. So I think it's pretty consistent with what the McKinsey results, what the Catalyst results told us about women and some headwinds that happen in the organization. And it sounded like, from the ideas that you shared, some of those were individual to women, and some of those were organization, and some of those were bias, but some of them are inside and some of them are outside, right? Is that a fair summary?
And it just occurred to me too, though, particularly, for example, looking at retail, where you have very many women who are dealing directly with the customers who are selling. There are then, the minute you look at store managers and above to the local headquarters, right, you see the women dropping off. And part of that, it occurs to me, is legacy thinking and legacy system, because if you've already got males in positions, you have to transition or make new positions. So without organizations actually flattening, that complicates the issue of moving women up as well.
Okay. So do you mean item related to sponsorship in moving women there, or really?
No, if I want your position, I have to wait to get you out of it.
Oh, right. That's pretty easy to do. Do you want my job? Yeah. So that's a difficult one, right? And especially in Japan, where you see the deck stacked, probably not only one level ahead of you, but 3 or 4 levels ahead of you, and related to the point that you made, Craig, about, gosh, do I really want that? So I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about some research that we've done around stages of contribution in an organization, and really what happens in a career in the stages of contribution through the lenses of confidences. So we've talked a little bit about confidences. We've done some work around confidences and really looking at what types of confidences are needed to make larger organizational impact. So I'm going to run through that fairly quickly. We have another conversation. I'm mindful of time. I've heard that I have a hard stop at 1:50, but I have a real hard stop at 2 o'clock. Is that right? Just confirming.
30 seconds to thank you both.
Oh, okay. So I have a hard stop at 1:59:30. Okay. So I'm kind of gonna work to that. Okay. So really, what our research has done is really to look that, there's some common themes here. We've seen it, it's been validated by a lot of research, not just our research. But really to move this needle, the things around the woman in an organization need to change. We call that a shared responsibility model. I will get to it. Organizations do it differently. When I was at Shinsei Bank, we set a quota, 25% women managers in 3 years. We hit 22.8% women in 3 years, 25% women in 38 months. And we had to promote people that were not ready because we didn't have a pipeline of people who were ready. We had to take greater risk on people to put them into roles that would lead to more general management. Now, can you think how hard that is to do in a large, proud, Japanese organization where all of your management are men. So you have to do other things. You have to change other parts of the ecosystem around enabling women to get through those transitions. So that's what we're talking about in the ecosystem. It's not just setting the quota, it's setting the quota plus. What types of support do you need to do to really enable the quota? If not, why not? So then this invisible diversity-related forces are there. And a lot of that in Japanese organizations we see are the things that you talked about, unconscious bias or simply mindset. You know, oh, the women aren't ready to do those jobs. Oh, we're promoting them ahead of their time. They don't deserve those positions. They haven't paid their dues. They haven't been here working 60-hour weeks for 20 years, like I have. You know, there is some entitlement that we're enabling by these types of things. So really it's about changing the whole ecosystem around this idea of shared responsibility. But let's talk about the dynamics of where people get stuck and why they get stuck in the organization. We already talked about the dynamic of there's not enough line leadership roles available for women, in that women typically would get caught maybe in a functional pathway and not get broadened out. And our research does confirm that. But really what happens in an organization is based on a level of contribution. So we have 4 levels of contribution. I'll go into those in a minute. But you can have different levels of contribution at different stages in your career, different titles in your career. You might have a very senior executive who's actually not contributing strategically to the organization, but that runs a very successful business. And so when we talk about stages of contribution, we're looking through the lens of impact to the organization. And these transitions, as you go through the impacts, we call a novation. And it really comes from a company we bought called Global Novations that are one of the leaders in diversity inclusion practice. And they call these stages novations as you go through. So you can see we have the impact on the left here and the key transitions that people make in their career and actually in their roles. So the first one is contributing dependently. You can imagine what that is. The second one is contributing independently, then contributing through others, and then finally contributing strategically to the organization. Now this isn't necessarily, again, related to how high up in the organization you go or what your title is. It's about your role in the organization, and it's about different confidences related to those roles. So as we look at this, you can see the descriptors of the, I guess it's self-evident. I don't need to read all of those, and we'll have them in the handout in a moment. Basically, you have these stages of contribution that have higher levels of organizational impact. What influences those, or where they become very important in moving through those novations, are these 3 confidences. So we talked about a certain confidence. We put the confidences in a framework. And the framework, really, the first confidence that people develop in any job is this technical competence. It's subject matter expertise, this functional competence. And people become confident in what they do. The second one is really about this political and influential. You know, getting things done through others, building consensus, motivates, mobilizes. And then the third one is a little larger because that's related to organizational impact. And that's, you know, very interesting because you see a lot of things in there that we associate with women leaders. Being a good communicator, being a good listener, being more empathetic, supportive, interpersonally skillful. But these are the 3 things that we see that the confidences that are required to move through those novations. So if we go back here, you know, then stage 1, what we're going to see is you need more of the technical functional competence, and that the interpersonal and strategic competences become more important as you have greater impact in the organization. Okay? So I'm sorry, I'm flying really fast. I'm flying really fast because I have a 1.59.30 deadline, a hard stop. But let's talk about this a little bit, right? Let's talk about this on the table because this is a workshop. And this time, instead of 3 minutes of me cutting you off, let's take about 5 minutes. And I'm going to give you a handout. And the handout will have all those descriptions so you don't have to remember back for 5 slides. And here are the questions I'd like you to talk about quickly. Okay? The first question, in which area do you feel high confidence? In the second, in which area do you feel least confident? And then what gets in the way of you developing these confidences in your present role in your present organization? And then finally, let's ask those 4 stages of contribution. What do you think is your dominant stage? And given your current level of responsibility, what should be your dominant stage? Okay, so as Ginger pointed out, I'm a dreamer. And I'm quite a dreamer thinking that you're all the way through this conversation in a very short period of time. But I'd like to start the conversation. Okay, so let's go to this table. Now, I don't expect anybody, like Tish pointed out to me in the back table, she said, this is very personal to me. That's kind of hard to talk about in a group. I get that, okay? And I understand that. So without saying personal to you, what did you talk about? Where are people at? This is the pass the microphone confidence. Yeah, we didn't cover that one yet.
That's because men aren't used to giving it away.
Exactly.
Is that better? Yeah, we had a really great, albeit quite quick conversation. And I think we all felt in elements that our strengths probably lay more in technical and relational in terms of our main confidences. And I think all of us, and this is quite telling, probably said that the political and influential part was where we felt least confidence. Or perhaps we recognised it and chose to step away because we had more important things in our life, and we felt that entering into a perhaps challenging political situation within work was going to detract from other important things. In terms of where we'd all like to be, I think what we have decided is perhaps in each of our organisations we probably haven't had the opportunity or the remit granted to allow us to demonstrate our leadership potential or our ability to get things done. So yeah, that is our summary. Don't know if anybody else wants to add. Jacqueline? You've said it all.
Oh, that's great. Wow, you covered a lot of ground in those 5 minutes. And you had an effective person that kind of wrapped that all up for you, right? Who wants to go next? Who hasn't had a chance yet?
When I express myself, and when I use, I'm not good at a lot of time. So you tell me always Japanese use, and I'm not good at. But see the other country, especially European country, they are not using, not good at. So because I not use not good at it, because I have not confidence. So it's I could recognize that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. One more comment. Don't challenge me.
So I think within the group it was basically technical and relational confidence were the highest. But one thing I reflected upon was that as I change in my career, I get put into more situations where there are more political influential situations. And while I don't know if I would say I'm confident at it, I have to exercise that competency more. And what I find is that perhaps on what gets sacrificed is the relational side. That the more you try to push and persuade and influence at a strategic level, in my personal experience, and this is not true for a lot of great leaders, I tend to actually perhaps become less of an effective listener. Perhaps I might be perceived as less supportive, et cetera, et cetera. I'll leave that to other people to judge. If you ask my brother, he'd absolutely agree with that statement, that I'm a total jerk at times. But, but yeah, I just find that those two confidences at times can get into conflict.
Okay. Thank you for that open sharing. I'll talk with you about that later. Yeah. Anybody on this table you want to? 60 seconds. Yeah, 60 seconds. Okay. Thanks, Ginger.
Well, I mostly spoke about my downcomings, which means that I effectively proved that I may not have been the best of listeners, which was one of the points I was making, and hence felt most comfortable in the political influential side of things. I'm not sure how much value that has for everybody in the room, but that's what we spent most of the time talking about in terms of what are the three confidences one might or might not be confident in.
Okay. Thank you. So let me share with you that, you know, I've no surprises, most people get stuck in the second. The second stage of contribution, and it's harder to pass from the second to the third stage because of all the things that you've mentioned. You know, you have to be more politically astute. You have to influence others and get things done through others. And so making that transition, it's very common to, you know, many leadership transitions where you have to get things done through other people. And you need these confidences that are really related to this influential skill and these relational skills. So this is a particular headwind for women in the organization and to get into more senior leadership positions in the organization. So we pointed out there's the study on the back table that really goes into detail about it, but we really see the solution of this related to the things that I was talking about, which are all people are capable. It's development is the key in getting people into the positions that develop these confidences. And that if you do that, then the obstacles can be managed. We say they're managed through shared responsibility. And we look at the responsibilities three ways. Through the individual lens and what women can do themselves to develop these confidences, primarily through assignment into roles. We look at what has to happen on the manager side of the equation to support the woman in accepting, adapting, and learning these confidences, and the organizational support, what the organization has to do. So I put two case studies together. I know I'm really out of time, so I'm just going to talk about you know, those three tenets in what we did at Shinsei Bank. And I put together another case study that's about Kalbi, which is a big snack food company in Japan. What we did at Shinsei, I mentioned, we set a 25% quota of women managers in 3 years, and we reached 22.8% in 36 months and 25% in 38 months. We also built a child care facility at the bank, and we provided free child care to any child up to age 3 years. And, you know, so that's kind of the big organizational support. It costs 4 million yen per child to take care of the one child for a year. So you can begin to imagine that's a big investment. I mean, when you talk about the infrastructure, certifying the daycare workers, making sure we had a healthy environment and activities and all the things that you would expect. But the interesting thing is 98% of women came back to work after their first child, and 95% of them came back to work after their second child. So they didn't have to have the interruption in their careers that a woman in Japan particularly would have in, you know, having a child, caring for a young child, and the availability of child care resources in the market. So that's, you know, that's a big organizational thing to do. And I'm afraid most multinational companies can't afford to do that. So, but they pair, they look at if there's a, you know, big footprint in a building or a group of buildings, you know, they'll get together and share resources, and some give some support, but that's big support. On the manager side, we had to train all the managers about this thing you brought up, unconscious bias. We had to make sure that, you know, it was quota driven. I mean, it wasn't, if not, why not? It was really quota driven. And so we had the KPI there, and if certain business or support units didn't meet the KPI, there were consequences, real consequences. So we had to train and make sure that the managers supported women getting into management positions. And that required a lot of effort because, you know, people weren't, you know, really willing to accept that. The third thing we did from organizational level, which was really driven by the women, is they created their own internal networks, but more importantly, they invited really high-end women speakers to come in and talk with us. So Fumiko Hayashi came and talked about, I can remember sitting in the first row with all the other management committee members, and she says, before I address everybody, I want to address all the men in the first row. And we were all men on the management committee. She said, the first thing you have to do is start listening better. And then, you know, she went on and gave her ideas and how she went through her career. And then we had Mariko Bondo came and talked with us about her role in promoting gender issues in Japan. So that ecosystem, really empowering the individual, the women really creating these networks, creating their own cohorts in the organization to help develop and share experiences, role models, organization support through daycare centers, and really the manager kind of helping them with this area of unconscious bias. So Yoshiko is waving a watch, which means I'm past the 0.30 seconds. Ginger's standing already with the microphone. Elizabeth is twitching and actually looking at me. So I think I'll call it quits. Now, I've made some copies of the presentation. They're on the back. I didn't get to a lot of it. So if there's not enough copies and you're interested in one, just let us know and we'll put it together. And we've captured some notes today. We'll be sharing it back with you. So if there's anything useful that you'd like to use in the future, please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to both our speakers.